You're listening to Speak Your Piece, a podcast about social determinants of health. I am your host, Dr. Damien Kelly. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm Rabbi Dan Gordon. I'm the religious leader of Temple Beth Torah in Humble, Texas. I came to Houston as program director of the Jewish Community Center, running their children's and camping programs. And in addition to leading this congregation, prison chaplain, a volunteer prison chaplain. And I'm also a professional storyteller, both in public schools and senior centers and summer camps and anybody else who wants to hear a story. My first professional job was as a summer camp director. And to me, that is like a spiritual leader. You're the leader of a group of people. I did mostly Jewish summer camps, but there was one camp that I ran for a few years, a fresh air camp for economically disadvantaged children. And they were inner city kids from Pittsburgh. And we said for 1 week of your summer, we had 100 kids a week, rotating every week. For 1 week, you're going to be treated with respect. There's no adult who's going to yell at you. You're going to be called by your first name and not some nickname that someone else hung on you. You're going to get 3 good meals to eat every day. And if you don't have enough clothes to wear, you're going to get them. Mm-hmm. We charged $5 for a week of sleepover camp. We did fundraising and allowed to do that. But to me, it was about creating a world.
Yeah.
In these fences, we're going to be respectful to each other.
This podcast, we talk to people about social determinants of health. What makes a person healthy? What fills a person? How does an individual's, just from your point of view, religious and spiritual beliefs really impact their approach to maintaining health and well-being?
The biggest thing I've learned, Damien, is that every single person is different. Okay. And almost all of us are different people every day. So what works for me today is going to be different tomorrow. You asked about religious belief and connection to faith. For some people, that's very internal. Meditation, worship, a personal connection with God. For many people, I think it's much more about community. And I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Because if you go with I don't think this was intended to be a religious podcast, and it's not preachy, but if you go with the passage in Genesis where God says, let us make humans in our image. Mm-hmm. And you think of every person as being in the image of God. In fact, there's a legend, we call it Midrash. Mm-hmm. There's a legend that God said, I'm going to create humankind from one man. I'm going to start with just one man so that nobody will ever be able to say, my father was more important than yours. Because we all came from the same. But if you go with the idea that we're all human beings in the image of God, then when we get together with each other, we're connecting with those pieces of God. And that huge, huge thing in Judaism is the singular nature of God. One God. Mm-hmm. I met a Hindu person recently who I always thought Hinduism was polytheistic. And some Hindu people talk about their polytheism because there are many gods within the Hindu religion. But this person said, we are actually monotheistic. It's one God, many faces. And when I thought about that, I said, well, that's not that different from Judaism. We just don't put a face on it. Mm-hmm. We have one God with many attributes. We have the merciful God. Mm-hmm. We have the powerful God. We have the God of justice. We have the God of kindness. We have the God of the protector. And all these different aspects we hope will come to us at different times, at the times that we need it. And when we're questioning about something, our hope is that that's the part of God that will be there for us. Our teaching tells us. People don't always follow all the teachings because nobody knows all the teaching. But our teachings tell us that we're not supposed to pray for God to do something. What's done is already set in motion. If I have cancer, God can't take away my cancer, but my connection with God might help me deal with what's going on in a different way.
I like that.
So when you get to health, I think that attitude makes a big difference. I had an uncle once, Damien, who I didn't really care for. And when his oldest son said to me, when my father passes away, I'd like you to conduct the funeral, I was seriously hoping that I would be out of the country at the time. But then, when he did die, and I was available, I started talking to his children and my siblings and my parents and everybody else. And the things that I found annoying in him became endearing. I saw him from a different light because I saw other people's perspectives from him. And I think that, boy, oh boy, that leads to part of the conversation that we were having before we turned on the recording. That when you get to know different people as human individuals, I heard a few months ago, there was a lot of stuff in the news about legislation against gender-affirming counseling and medication and et cetera. And there were some people who thought that was encouraging people to want to change their gender. And other people thought that this was a compassionate thing for people who were born into the wrong body.
Yes.
And I heard a Republican congressman, I wish I remembered his name, say, I used to support the legislation that was prohibiting gender-affirming kinds of policies. I used to support that. And those are the policies that some people would call anti-gay or anti-trans.
Yes.
All right. And he said, I used to support that legislation, but now I don't. And the interviewer said, what changed? And he said, they stopped being those trans people and became Jesse and Susan and Terry because I met them. And when someone's a person and an individual and a human being, then they're not a category anymore. And that, to me, is one of the exciting things. Boy, I got off the subject of health.
No. This all ties to health.
Yeah, because it's healthy to understand what makes people different. Doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. I had a situation in Israel. So as you know, Jewish people, Jesus is not part of our worship. We don't have Jesus as a Messiah, as a divine entity. Jesus historically was a Jewish person, a very passionate Jew, a teacher, and that's how we think of him. I was at the Kinneret Sea in Israel, which is also called the Sea of Galilee. Actually, Lake Kinneret Lake and the Sea of Galilee.
Gotcha.
Okay. And I was with a group of 13 rabbis and 13 Christian ministers. And we were there to learn from each other. It was called Interfaith Partners for Peace. We studied some Jewish texts. We studied some Christian texts. We were learning from each other. Second day. First day, we studied some Jewish Talmud. Then we went to the Beatitudes. We went to the place of fishes and loaves.
Okay.
And then we're at a kibbutz, a hotel on the Sea of Galilee. And this young minister, we had a long day of doing all kinds of different things. And we were paired up, a minister and a rabbi from different cities. So I was paired up with someone from Houston. There were two from Chicago and two from LA, etc. And the Presbyterian minister from Houston and I were having a drink in the lobby. And a young minister from Pittsburgh, my hometown, ironically, came up and said, this is an important place. I'd like to read from the Bible what happened here. Anyone want to come with me? Sure, why not? So about 5 or 6 of us went out on the dock.
You're drinking,
exactly.
You loosened up.
Right. So we're standing out on this dock. 5 or 6, couple, 2 or 3 ministers, 2 or 3 rabbis. And we've got a full moon with the reflection on the sea.
Oh, that's beautiful.
We've got lights of the city on the other side. And this woman starts to read this passage that I had never heard. Mm-hmm. I'd heard about it, but I'd never heard it. And the passage was about, so here I am, the rabbi in the synagogue, talking New Testament. There's apostles in a boat. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
Apostles in a boat. Jesus starts walking on the water toward them. Mm-hmm. He says, "Come to me." Peter gets out of the boat.
Yes, he does.
Starts walking on the water. Mm-hmm. Realizes what he's doing and starts to sink. Mm-hmm. And climbs back into the boat. So we start talking about it, and start talking about faith and fear and all the different aspects of that passage. And then the young woman who read it said, "Okay, now that I've read it and I've taught it many times, I'd like to hear it. Mm-hmm. Would someone else read it?" So I said, "Sure." And I had never read aloud a passage of the New Testament. And I'm reading this passage, and as I'm reading it, glancing out at the sea and thinking, I have no need to accept this as truth. Mm-hmm. And I have no need to contradict it and call it a lie. I don't have to accept it because this isn't part of my Bible. It's not part of my belief. Mm-hmm. But I don't have to say you're wrong. I can just say this is a sacred teaching to many people. Mm-hmm. Then I began thinking, well, what sacred is? And I had been longing to see the Western Wall. We'd been in Israel for 2 days and hadn't been to Jerusalem yet. And I thought, well, the wall was built and the sea was created. Does that make one more sacred than the other? Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, if the wall was built by people who had a passion for a connection with the Spirit, well, that's pretty good too. And I was thinking, there isn't a value judgment there. Things are good in different ways.
Yes.
And we can walk into if I'm at the Grand Canyon or at Yosemite, I'm feeling God in a much different way than I'm feeling in a synagogue. Mm-hmm. If I'm alone in the woods, I feel a very special personal connection. Mm-hmm. If I'm in a room with a bunch of people praying, I'm feeling their connection enhancing my own.
Okay.
And so they're good in a different way. And I think that we need that balance of being able to realize that being alone with our thoughts can be very important and powerful. And being together with others can be very important and powerful in a different way.
We spoke earlier. Well, I'm going to tie 2 things together. So the stories you're telling takes me back to Sunday school growing up. Whenever we hear that story of how Peter got out of the boat, when you hear it in context, some preachers will talk about how he took his light off God or he took his eyes off Jesus, and that's where he started to doubt and such. I've heard one person say, which I really liked, for him the takeaway was, out of all the people in that boat, all the apostles, one person, and to use the word we talked earlier, had the chutzpah to get out of the boat. And it's really that stepping out on faith. That's it. Chutzpah. I don't know if I'm pronouncing.
Yeah, you are. Chutzpah is basically the nerve.
The nerve.
That nerve that the Cowardly Lion wanted. But you see, when she read that passage to me and I heard it for the first time, my image was Wile E. Coyote, who's chasing the Roadrunner off the cliff. And he runs into the middle of the sky and looks down.
He's like,
falls.
"Oh wait!" He realized where I'm at. Like, right. There's no ground underneath me.
Yep. But there's a legend. I mentioned the word midrash a minute ago. Mm-hmm. So the Torah or the Bible or the 5 books of Moses is cryptic. Mm-hmm. Doesn't give it all. Midrash is the stories that enhance the text that maybe happened, maybe didn't happen.
Okay.
All right. And there's a midrash about the splitting of the sea that And if you read the Bible, if you see the Ten Commandments or Prince of Egypt, you see
that's my mom's favorite movie.
Prince of Egypt. The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston. Moses.
Yep. If you watch that, you see the sea split in 15 seconds.
Okay.
All right. If you read the Bible, it takes all night. If you go to the Midrash, there is one person by the name, very obscure, nobody in the Bible, I think it's mentioned once in the Bible, named Nachshon ben Amminadav. And he was some distant relative of Moses' brother Aaron. Okay? Who knows where it came from? But the legend is that Nachshon, like Peter getting out of the boat, that Nachshon started to walk into the sea. All right. Now, what the Bible says is, the Bible says that the Israelites are crying out, Moses, why did you lead us here only to die into the sea? And Moses is instructed by God. Moses cries out to God, and God says, according to the Bible, why are you crying out to me? Hold up your staff and the sea and watch what happens. An interpretation of that is that God is saying there's time for prayer and there's time for action. But according to the Midrash, according to the legend, Nachshon ben Amminadav starts to walk into the sea. And he walks in up to his knees and up to his chest and up to his throat and up to his nose. And according to the legend, when God sees that one man go up to his nose in water, that's when the sea started to split.
You and I spoke earlier again, kind of off record. Well, not off record, but off audio. And we were having a conversation. We were talking about the camera setup you have in the temple and how it's different now post-COVID because you have the audio playing also. People can stay at home, get that experience. But you made such an interesting point about community. I'm tying it back into the community that you mentioned earlier. You made such an interesting point when you're talking about how community and you might gain something by staying at home just watching it, but you're also losing something as well. And again, I think that really ties back into the healthy living component. Do you want to tell our listeners what you said?
Sure. That you're missing out on being with others. Mm-hmm. But just as important, they're missing out on being with you. Now, during COVID, when we were doing everything remote,
yes,
some of my colleagues, they did the live stream. And you asked me, why don't you do it on a YouTube channel? We're doing it on Zoom. On Zoom, we had that interaction. I had a difficulty. We did for what it was, 2 years?
Just about.
I had a difficult transition when we moved into the sanctuary and 5 or 6 people are in person and 30 of them are on Zoom because it's not as boisterous a community. At the time I said, give me one or the other. At least on Zoom, I looked at all the little boxes on the screen and at least I saw people's faces. Now, if people turned their cameras off, that didn't help me. As I told you, I'm a storyteller. All right. When I started as a storyteller, the biggest venue I had, I'm on stage and the lights are off in the house because they put the lights on the person on stage. I couldn't do it. When I was an actor and doing someone else's script, the audience didn't matter. But a storyteller is having a conversation with the audience. Mm-hmm. I needed to see people's faces. And so I got used to seeing people's faces in the little boxes on Zoom. Every once in a while, I've been asked to do a Zoom presentation for a conference or something like that.
I hate them. I can't do it. I hate them so bad.
Yep. Because what happens is you don't know if those people are there or not.
They're washing the dishes. They're folding laundry.
Right.
The camera's off. Yeah. I'm just a voice in the background.
Exactly. So I could do that, but it's never as good as when you have people. There's a story. My dad told me this story about this guy who was hired to deliver a paper that he had written. And he had to deliver the entire paper. And it was this long, scholarly thing. And it was going on. And people, little by little, were just walking out. And by the end of it, one person was left. And he had 2 pages left that he had to finish. Well, he got through him. He said to the guy, "I'm so appreciative. Why did you stick with it all this time?" He said, "I'm the next speaker." we all do what we have to do. All right, then, so you're free to edit any of this out.
I got to keep it. It sounds so much like my dissertation defense.
Oh yeah,
because we had to do it via Zoom. Again, we were in COVID,
right? Yeah,
and people were kind of checking. Hey, I got to, because they had to go to another meeting. People would come in, hang out for 5-10 minutes. Hey, good luck, and then jump on to their next meeting because everyone is so busy. And at the end of it, there was only like maybe 5 or 6 people still there when I was defending.
We were doing more by not doing it.
Circling back to, we're talking about community. People's anxiety is through the roof, depression. When we're dealing with faith, and again, looking at health, how do you think that intersects when it comes to, stress, adversity? How can faith be that healing ointment?
It's a tough question, Damien. Depression is such a common thing. And it's so much easier to talk about it when you're on the other side of it. First time I ever felt depressed, I was probably 23 years old. First time I ever lived alone. And I said, I'm depressed right now. And I decided that depression is temporary. And I think that's part of, you could say I played a mind game on myself. But I said, I don't know when it's going to end, but I know it will. And I just gave myself that confidence. A lot of things about my personal faith is connected with people and community. And to have that faith that somebody is there, whether I choose to call on them or not. I've had people in my life who I said, I was going through a rough time for a while, and they say, "Why didn't you call me?" Those are the times we're not motivated to call somebody, that we don't feel like seeing anybody and we're not motivated. And that's the hardest thing. So how does faith enter into that? Especially if you're not motivated to go and be with people. It makes it all the more hard. I don't know that many people who break out of it through reading a book.
Yeah.
Okay. But I know I had one time, I've been seeing the same hairstylist for over 20 years.
Your hair looks lovely.
Well,
you have a nice beard. I'm jealous. I can't grow a beard.
I keep trying to get it longer like the sages. But my hairstylist, who's a Christian woman, I shared with her, I went through a rough stretch during COVID, and she said to me, well, she texted me later. She said, "I appreciate your sharing that with me. You never mentioned it while you were going through it, but I could tell you weren't quite yourself for a while, and I'm glad you're back. And I read this passage of the Bible today, and it gave me comfort. Maybe it will give you some." And I looked it up, and what really gave me comfort was just the fact that she
reached out.
That she did that. And she also did it from Psalms, which is part of my Bible and not part of the New Testament. And so she was also sensitive enough to give me something that I might be familiar with.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, when you get into the Psalms, a dear friend of mine asked me if I would, and this was during the time when I wasn't feeling myself, asked me if I would be a co-author of a multi-faith book about the Psalms. And I said, well, a lot of those Psalms are great if you really study them, but some of them are, God is wonderful because he screws up my enemies. And those aren't the ones that I take to so much. There's some about God's love for people and people's love for God. But when it gets into, and there's a lot in the Bible that I have to admit I find discomfort with.
Yeah.
Because when it's about, I want God to screw up the people who I don't like.
Mm.
You know, thwart mine enemies. I'd rather make friends with them. You know, and that's what people. That's what it means when you talk about being a person instead of a category.
Mm.
My enemies. Well, who are my enemies? People who don't really know me.
Yeah.
Or people who I don't really know. Who do I have judgments about? But I'm not answering your question. Your question is, how can faith help keep us healthy?
Well, two quick things. One, I like when you talked about community and having the importance of people there. What I think one of the important things about having that community of faith is when you're not there, you're not motivated to be there, to be around other people. Those people notice your absence.
Yeah.
And they may or may not reach out to you if they haven't seen you in a couple weeks, or like, hey, let's check on this person. I do that with my friend group when I haven't seen people for a while, just to drop in and, hey man, listen, someone out there loves and cares about you. It's as a simple, hey, how you doing? That kind of thing. I think that really helps with people who may be going through some struggle in life, but also there's so much about, and some of this is just past us being men, that we don't talk to people until it's over. And we'll say, well, I was going through something, but it's over now, so I can talk about it now. But when I'm going through it, we're more closed off. We were doing a forum last night, and we were at a black barbershop. And I was talking to the people there, and the barber, we were having a conversation about, people, mental health and stuff. And he said, people are more likely to talk to me, the barber, about mental health than they will a mental health professional.
Absolutely. My hairdresser like that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
They hear so many people's problems every day.
In fact, one of my youthful experiences that I credit with helping me be the rabbi I am today.
Okay.
Was there was a really, really prominent rabbi here in Houston by the name of Jack Siegel, who recently passed away.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he was 94.
Oh, wow.
He had been in Houston at Congregation Beth Yeshurun for over 60 years. All right. He had come in 1965, 58 years. And I worked with him. And this is the first time I'm meeting with him. I was at the time principal of their high school program. So I was working with teenagers. And Rabbi Siegel tells me two stories. He spoke very fast. If anybody knows who Rabbi Siegel was, they know he spoke very fast. He told me two stories about people who had come to him for money. One of them, turned out the man had a trust fund. He had a mental illness that he couldn't touch his trust fund, and he passed away and left $20,000 to the synagogue. Then, without missing a beat, he told me a story about a young woman who was always asking for money and always seemed like she was on her last legs, and he would always give her a sympathetic gift. And then he didn't see her for a long time. She came back and she was dressed nicely and looked clean. And he said, "Look, sweetie, you really took care of yourself." And she said, "No thanks to you. The fact that everybody in my life cut me off and you kept enabling me by giving me money, I remained an addict until finally I hit rock bottom." And she blamed him for her problems. And the rabbi who's talking to me at the time, I was trying to determine, why is he telling me these stories? I didn't ask him why. Because I wanted to figure it out for myself. Because this was a man who knew Jewish teachings like the back of his hand. And if he wanted to give me a lesson from the Talmud, he could recite it like that. What he did was he gave me two personal stories. One that worked out well, one that didn't. And he said, "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I just do what's in my heart." The message I got was, you're a young guy starting out. I've been a rabbi for decades. I still don't know all the answers. I got to figure out my way. You got to figure out yours.
And have you done that?
Great question, Damien. I keep relearning it all the time. Sometimes things work. Sometimes they don't. It's It's a matter of knowing that, it's a matter of humility, really. It's a matter of knowing that I'm going to try my best, and it might work out and it might not. But if it doesn't work out, it's not my fault. And if it does work out, it's not my credit. That I'm going to do my best. And here's where my personal faith, my belief in God, it changes about whether God's pulling a lever or something like that. But sometimes I say the right thing, and I say to myself, I don't think I did that alone. And sometimes I make a mistake, and I learn from it. And there are times when something happens, and I say, it's pretty unlikely that God had nothing to do with that. I don't know. And people who absolutely know, some of them I admire and some of them scare me. Because if you know things that you cannot possibly know, well, that's either super faith or super arrogance. We have sacred texts. Bible, Torah, Quran, all kinds of sacred texts. If we believe that God created those teachings, somebody had to translate it into a language we understand. We can't fully understand God. And if God is everlasting, and if God is timeless, then those teachings have to grow with the times too. That things that were written long ago that still have meaning today might be about how the world changes. One of the most controversial things in our world today is gay people. And that some people are passionately against gay marriage, or they this or that. And a lot of times they point to the passage in Leviticus that says, do not lie with a man as you lie with a woman. And what did that mean when it was written? And are teachings timeless? So some say that the whole idea of homosexuality centuries ago was not about a monogamous love and a relationship between people of the same gender. It was about violence and power and rape and force.
Gotcha.
The story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom was this evil town where anyone who came in would get sodomized. All right. And that's why sodomy became prohibited. Well, that action was an attack, a violent attack on somebody. It wasn't people making love with each other.
Gotcha.
And so there are some who look at that passage in the Bible that says, don't force yourself on somebody. The Talmud, which I mentioned, is the kind of the interpretive area that picks out more specific things. Sexuality in the Talmud. Now, of course, they weren't acknowledging or endorsing a homosexual relationship. But basically, the Talmud says that anything between a husband and wife, any sexual act between a husband and wife is completely okay, except for one, forcing someone to do something against their will. That if two people are enjoying each other sexually, that's their business. But if one person is putting their power against another, that's not acceptable. That's a pretty interesting teaching. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, and religion makes sense. There's a contradiction in terms. But some of it does. And that's the challenge, is to find those things that do make sense. One of the things about the Jewish mourning customs, those are things that make a lot of sense. And one of them is that there is a particular prayer that is only supposed to be said if there are at least 10 people present, so that you don't mourn by yourself.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
That's one of those things that I embrace. I'll be honest, I don't embrace every little rule, but there's some that I find real meaning in. And personally, I don't do it just because it's written down. It needs to make sense to me, which is not the view of every rabbi. There's some who say, we do it because it's written down and we're supposed to do it. And I respect that too, because that's a particular discipline. And that's a way of following a discipline. And that's why just having the open mind that if you're doing something with a sacred intention, then that is a world of difference. If you're doing something with an ulterior motive, it's also a world of difference. And if you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is my action or my words going to benefit the world? Or is it going to take something away? Words are a powerful thing.
Faith is so important in people's health. How can health practitioners, people in these positions, doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, social workers, whomever, better work with people in these faith communities? Because ultimately, your goal is the same, to help this person on their journey here.
Yeah. I think it boils down to one important word. Listen. Deuteronomy, I always forget if it's chapter 6, verse 4, or chapter 4, verse 6. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Listen, everybody. There's one God. It begins with the word listen. And the word for listen, Shema, starts with shh, being quiet. I got a friend who's an MD he's called a holistic doctor. And his slogan is, healing and exercise is preferable to pills and potions. Pills and potions are preferable to surgery. Surgery is preferable to death. Caring is most important. And to listen to people and look at how is this person different, whether they have a condition or whether they're just a person now. But you asked about connecting with the faith community. And one of the difficult progressions that has been happening is there are many more people who are not connected with a community than are. Those who have a church, a synagogue, a mosque, even a friendship group are at a special advantage because they have opened themselves to others and connected in ways where people can be there for each other. There are a lot of people who are flying solo out there. And so how can health practitioners help and connect with those who are connected to a faith and those who are not connected to a faith? That's as big a challenge. Don't have ready answers, but listening is important. Humility is important. Being able to say, here's what I know, here's what I don't know. A doctor is a scientist, but he or she is also someone with an opinion. And they're interpreting that opinion.
How can people get in contact with you?
Oh, okay. RabbiDanGordon.com, www.RabbiDanGordon.com. That's probably easy enough. You can just Google my name, Rabbi Dan Gordon. The synagogue is Temple Beth Torah. It's in Humble, Texas.
Awesome. Rabbi Dan, shalom.
Shalom. Peace be with you.
Thanks for listening to our latest episode. If you like the content and want to help us grow, do me a favor. Like, share, and subscribe to the Health RCMI channel. Also, tell a friend. Special thanks to our producer, Allison Medley. And, as always, our fearless leader, Dr. Esmenario Bassi. I am your host, Dr. Damien Kelly, leaving you with one simple message. Do good things.